Welcome back now to the border. Customs and Border Patrol sources telling Fox nearly 120 Chinese nationals illegally crossed the San Diego border on Saturday alone over the weekend. 120. Of the nearly 50,000 Chinese nationals that have entered the U.S. since October of last year, more than 30,000 of those crossings have happened in California. 50,000 Chinese nationals that we know of since October. Nearly 9,000 migrants from India and nearly 8,000 Turkish migrants have also crossed the San Diego border so far this year. Meanwhile, House Republicans are now demanding answers after two illegal Jordanian nationals attempted to breach the Quantico military base. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan sending a letter to DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas asking about the men's immigration status and processing history. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. He is the House Chief Deputy Whip and a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Congressman, this is crazy. I mean, we've got breaches everywhere you look. When you speak to your colleagues on the Democrat side, do they admit that the border is incredibly dangerous right now? 50,000 Chinese nationals just since October. Do we have any idea what they're doing?
Well, Maria, thanks for having me on as always. And, you know, when you talk to Democrats, the Democrats realize this is an issue for them electorally, but I don't think they actually care about these illegal immigrants crossing the border because in their view, they see this as the future to the Electoral College. They think that they're going to flood the United States with illegal immigrants. They assume those illegal immigrants will vote Democrat. The polling actually suggests we're getting 55% of the Hispanic vote right now, but I'll leave that aside. But they think that they can shift the illegal immigrants around the United States and make up for the population losses that you're seeing in places like California, New York, Illinois, for example, and so that they can try to stay even with the Electoral College. So I think that that is their main concern. It's always about politics. It's always about their far left agenda. But going back to this issue in Quantico, there's so many questions, Maria, that need to be answered. For one, you had one Jordanian national who overstayed his visa for a year and a half. My question is, how is he supporting himself? Because the answer to that is there was either a support group with terrorist networks, for example, or these liberal organizations are supporting these individuals. That's one of the reasons why we need E-Verify as well, so we can make sure that if you're here illegally, you're not getting hired and you have to self-deport. The other individual came across from California, which begs the question, how many others on the terrorist watch? We don't know if he was on the terrorist watch list, but we know that there's been people on the terrorist watch list that are flooding across the border. It only took 19 to pull off 9/11. We know there's far more than 19 that are on the terrorist watch list. And were these two gentlemen on the terrorist watch list? Why isn't the FBI answering the question to Jim Jordan? My instinct says that they might be on the terrorist watch list. That's why the administration is slow to release that information to Jim Jordan. So again, there's a lot of questions that need answered, but all of this points back to the weakness of Joe Biden on the border.
So, again, when you speak with your colleagues on the left, other congressmen and congresswomen, Democrat, are you saying that it's all about politics? It's all about how many people they could get in the census, the Electoral College? They don't recognize the national security threat? They don't recognize the vulnerability America is in right now?
Some do, Maria, and some don't. I mean, we had Jayapal from Seattle at the Rules Committee, and under questioning, she wouldn't say that illegal immigrants shouldn't be able to vote in federal elections. And she was very soft on the fact that they should be able to vote in local elections. We just ran a bill last week saying that if you're in D.C., you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in D.C. elections. Right now, illegals can vote. Right now, if you're working in the Chinese embassy, you can vote in a D.C. election. I think only 80 Democrats voted in favor of that bill, and the vast majority voted against it. So it shows you where they are in their motivations. Now, they may admit that it's electorally a bad issue for them, but I think that they think long-term this is going to benefit the Democratic Party.
Well, it's incredible when you think about all of this. It gives credence to the idea that we're losing the country. When you consider the fact that representatives of America, representatives of the people in Congress are not focused on the national security threat of 50,000 Chinese nationals being apprehended at the San Diego and Texas border just since October. What is Xi Jinping doing? Creating a mini army in America? I mean, this is incredibly concerning to me.
Well, remember, if you're in China, you're only leaving China if you have permission of the CCP and the PLA, which begs the question, why are all these military-age males coming across the border? You know, like you said, you have 50,000 since October. they could be here to perhaps when China tries to invade Taiwan, they could try to attack critical infrastructure. They could try to foment civil unrest leading up to the 2024 election. They could be trying to infiltrate some of our sectors. We don't know, but knowing China and knowing the controls they have and knowing their long-term goal of supplanting the United States as the global superpower, we have to assume that they're here for nefarious reasons.
Meanwhile, President Biden will be campaigning in Philadelphia tomorrow with Vice President Kamala Harris. This is Biden's 5th visit to this area and the 7th visit to Pennsylvania this year. Obviously a swing state, Congressman. What are your thoughts on Pennsylvania and on this upcoming race?
I really think that President Trump is going to win Pennsylvania. If you look at it right now, he's up anywhere between 4% and 6% in the polls. In 2016, he was never ahead of Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania. And of course, he ended up winning Pennsylvania. So I think the demographics are playing in President Trump's direction. In 2020, we saw a lot of white blue-collar workers vote for Joe Biden under this pretext that he was one of them. But after Joe Biden shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, literally day number one of his administration, after he had these horrible policies that have led to inflation hurting the working class, those voters are going to come home to President Trump, and that's what's going to help President Trump carry Pennsylvania. And if he wins Pennsylvania and he wins Georgia, which it looks like he's going to win Georgia, it's game over for Biden. Electorally speaking, he cannot lose electorally if he has Pennsylvania and Georgia. That's not to mention some of the other swing states that he's up in. So I'm feeling very bullish, not just about Pennsylvania, but about the election in general.
But do you worry that he could get convicted? I mean, we're all waiting on the jury here. We could have a hung jury, which would mean a mistrial, but we could have a guilty verdict as well. What happens then?
Well, it's a shame that he's going through this. This is lawfare. This is the Democrats weaponizing the legal system. And this is something that you would see in a banana republic, going after the leading opposition heading into election. But set that aside, polling is actually pretty good on this issue. 58%, between 58 and 60% of Americans think that this is politically motivated. And remember, only about 48% identify as conservative. So that means, by definition, a lot of independents are viewing these trials, and it's actually breaking in President Trump's way because people feel bad for him and they feel like he's been a victim. So it's not necessarily bad electorally. It's horrible for the country. It's horrible for our legal system and politics moving forward. Not necessarily bad politically.
Congressman, real quick on the other issue we wanted to talk to you about. One of your constituents, Brian Hegerich, back home now after being released from custody in Turks and Caicos. He was detained for having ammunition in his luggage. Brian was one of 5 American tourists arrested in Turks and Caicos in the last 6 months for having ammunition in the luggage. Tyler Wenrick, Ryan Watson, and Sharita Grier all remain detained in Turks and Caicos. Michael Lee Evans was allowed to come back to the U.S. on bail while he awaits his sentencing next month. I know you traveled to Turks and Caicos earlier this month to meet with local government officials. What did you learn, and do you have any idea why he had ammunition in his luggage?
Well, Brian Hegerich and the others have all admitted that they had ammunition inadvertently. These are very small amounts. I mean, a few of them had 2 rounds that were just loose in a duffel bag or a purse, for example, with a grandmother. Brian didn't realize that he had the rounds in his suitcase. But regardless, what I learned when I was in Turks and Caicos was that they really don't have any empathy for these American detainees. I also learned that they're treating Americans differently than non-U.S. citizens. For example, we have a case with a Brazilian that had a few rounds of spare ammunition. She paid a fine and was released back to Brazil. The U.S. citizens, however, were charged. They were facing 12-year mandatory minimum sentences. They were treated very harshly, thrown in jail. With Brian Hegerich was placed in a jail cell with 3 people that were in there for homicide. We know that the grandmother from Florida, for example, was literally chained to a desk for 3 days, and it was up to the other American detainees to bring her food, water, blanket, pillows. So it's a very harsh treatment. Also, the prison at Turks and Caicos has been flagged by the UN for humanitarian violations, humanitarian rights. So these are very dire consequences that our Americans are facing. But again, there's a lot of anti-American sentiment on Turks and Caicos. There's internal political pressure where the ruling clique there, the ruling regime, ran on cracking down on tourism, which by definition almost means Americans, because we're 80 to 90% of the tourists going down there. So look, I would not travel to Turks and Caicos, and we need to make sure that we pressure Turks and Caicos to release the rest of the American detainees, to change this law, and we need the Biden administration to do a do not travel order to stop this. Remember, every 3 weeks an American is getting detained in Turks and Caicos.
That's incredible.
It's atrocious.
Congressman, this is really important information that our viewers need to understand about Turks and Caicos. Thank you. Congressman, good to see you. Guy Reschenthaler, thank you. We'll be right back.